I caught my neighbor in the garden and discovered she was running from the army. Most of the houses were neat, with freshly painted walls, well-trimmed hedges and gardens full of colorful flowers. On sunny mornings, he would often see children playing in the driveways, their laughter ringing in the air like a happy melody. Birds chirped from the trees lining the streets, and the occasional breeze brought the faint smell of roses or freshly cut grass. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved to each other, exchanged a few words, and went about their days in peaceful routine. Mark himself had moved here a few years ago, hoping for some stability in his life. He enjoyed his small but comfortable house with its little backyard and garden. He liked to spend his weekends tending to his plants, reading a book under the shade of the old oak tree, or simply sitting on the porch, watching the world go by. Life was simple, and Mark liked it that way. He was not one to seek excitement or adventure. He preferred the quiet, predictable rhythm of everyday life. Among the neighbors, there was one person who had always caught his attention, though not for any particular reason. Elena, who had moved in just a few months ago, lived next door. She was a quiet woman, not very tall but with a presence that somehow stood out. She kept to herself most of the time, rarely joining neighborhood gatherings or chatting over the fence. Yet there was something intriguing about her. Perhaps it was the way she cared for her little garden, always tending to the flowers with delicate hands, or maybe it was the occasional glance she would give when she noticed someone looking her way. Mark had never spoken to her more than a few words, but he felt a strange curiosity about her. It was a late evening when everything began to change. The sun was just setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was cooler than usual. Mark was sitting on his porch, sipping tea, enjoying the quiet. That was when he noticed Elena in her garden. She was not unusual at first glance. She was carrying a small bag and moving toward the back gate, but something about the way she moved seemed odd. She looked around nervously, as if checking to make sure no one was watching. Her steps were quick, almost hurried, and she seemed to be holding her breath as she moved. Mark's curiosity piqued. He had never seen Elena act this way before. Usually calm and composed, she now seemed tense and anxious. Mark wondered why she was leaving her house at this hour and carrying a bag. Was she going somewhere important? Or was something wrong? He felt a strange pull to find out. Normally, he would have ignored such thoughts, but tonight he could not. Something about her behavior seemed different, unusual enough to break the calm of the evening. He decided to follow her, staying at a distance so she would not notice him. He quietly got up from his chair, careful not to make a sound, and walked toward the garden gate. He kept the shadows of the trees between them as he moved, making sure she could not see him. Elena had already passed through the gate and was walking down a narrow path between the trees behind her yard. The path was dimly lit, the light from the setting sun barely reaching through the thick branches overhead. Mark moved slowly, stepping carefully over fallen leaves and small twigs, trying not to make any noise. As he followed her, he began to notice more details. Elena was holding the bag close to her chest, as if it contained something precious or important. She glanced behind her several times, her eyes sharp and alert, scanning the area quickly. Mark could feel her tension, even from a distance. It was as if she was afraid someone might be watching, someone she did not want to see her. He felt a mix of concern and curiosity. Why was she acting this way? What could be so important that she needed to leave her home in secret? The path led to a small clearing in the woods behind their neighborhood. Mark slowed down even more, crouching behind a large bush to watch. Elena was not alone. A man who looked to be waiting for her stepped forward as she approached. They exchanged something quickly, a few papers perhaps or some small items, and spoke in hushed tones. Mark could not hear exactly what they were saying, but the urgency in their gestures was clear. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she handed over the items, and the man nodded, his expression serious and focused. Mark's heart began to race. He had expected a simple explanation, maybe a late walk or a secret hobby, but this was something else entirely. He had stumbled upon a moment filled with secrecy and tension. He wondered if he should intervene or run back to the safety of his house. Part of him wanted to turn away, to forget what he had seen, but another part, a stronger part, urged him to stay and understand. There was a story here, a hidden piece of life that he had never imagined existed in his quiet, ordinary neighborhood. He stayed hidden, watching Alina finish her conversation and walk away, leaving the man behind. She moved with caution, her steps careful, almost rehearsed. Mark followed her again at a safe distance, careful not to make any sudden movements. She returned to her home after a short walk, slipping back through the gate and into her house. Mark waited for a few minutes, making sure she was safely inside before retreating to his own porch. His mind was buzzing with questions. Who was she really? What was she hiding? And why had she chosen to move into such a quiet neighborhood if she had to keep secrets? That night Mark could not sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. Alina's nervous glances, the hurried exchange, the small bag she had carried, it all seemed like pieces of a puzzle he could not solve. He thought about knocking on her door the next day, asking her if everything was okay, but he hesitated. What if he asked and upset her? What if she was hiding something serious and did not want anyone to know? He decided that patience was the best choice, at least for now. He would watch and wait, careful not to intrude but ready to help if needed. The following morning, Mark went about his routine, but he kept glancing toward Alina's house. She was already in the garden, as usual, tending to her plants, but there was still a sense of tension around her. Her movements were precise and deliberate, but her eyes seemed to carry a quiet worry. Mark wondered what kind of life she had before moving here. Had she always been cautious, or had something happened that forced her to live carefully, always watching her surroundings? He realized that sometimes people carried burdens invisible to the world. People who seemed ordinary and quiet might be facing challenges far beyond what anyone could imagine. Days passed, and Mark continued to observe Alina from a distance. He noticed the small routines she had, watering her plants at dawn, checking her bag and gait as if preparing for something, sometimes glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone. Each little detail added to the mystery surrounding her. Mark's curiosity grew, but it was accompanied by concern. He did not want to pry, but he could not ignore the feeling that Alina might be in trouble. He made a quiet promise to himself. If she ever needed help, he would be there. But for now, he would wait, careful to respect her privacy. In the weeks that followed, Mark began to understand something important. Alina's life, though mostly hidden, was full of strength and courage. Even in the small gestures, watering her flowers, carrying her bag carefully, moving quietly, he saw resilience. She was not careless or reckless. She was deliberate and thoughtful, always aware of her surroundings. Mark admired that, even as he felt the mystery tugging at his mind. He realized that behind every quiet neighbor, there might be untold stories of struggle, hope, and courage. And so, Mark's ordinary life in a quiet neighborhood began to intertwine with Alina's hidden story. Though they had not spoken much, he felt a silent connection to her, a recognition of strength, courage, and the hidden battles people faced. Little did he know that this quiet curiosity, this simple decision to follow a neighbor one evening, would soon lead him into a story far bigger than he could have imagined. A story that would reveal secrets, fears, and bravery in the most unexpected ways. The morning after that unusual evening, Mark could not stop thinking about Alina. Her movements, her nervous glances, and the small bag she carried, it all lingered in his mind like a puzzle waiting to be solved. He tried to focus on his daily routine, but every time he glanced out the window, he saw her in the garden, quietly tending her plants. yet always with an alertness that told him she was carrying something much heavier than a bag of soil or seeds. Mark realized that there was more to his quiet neighbor than anyone could see at first glance. She had a secret life, one that she had been protecting carefully from the world. That afternoon, Mark decided to go for a walk in the neighborhood, pretending to enjoy the fresh air while actually keeping an eye on Alina. She was at the far end of her garden, crouched down among the flowers. He noticed that her hands trembled slightly, as though she was anxious or tired. When she straightened, she looked toward the street as if checking for someone or something. Mark could feel his heart race. He knew that whatever she was hiding, it was serious, and it was not something he could ignore any longer. He wondered if he should approach her, but he hesitated, worried that asking questions might frighten her. As days passed, Mark's observations grew more detailed. He noticed patterns in Alina's behavior. Every morning she would arrive at her garden just after sunrise. She moved with precision, watering each plant carefully, trimming the leaves, and occasionally glancing toward the back gate. Then, around mid-morning, she would check her bag and glance toward the street again. Sometimes she would pause, looking over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear suddenly. In the evenings, she would take short walks through the trees behind her house, often carrying only the bag she had brought that first night. Mark realized that these walks were not casual strolls. They were careful, planned movements. She was avoiding attention. One evening, as the sun began to set, Mark noticed something unusual. Alina had left her house, carrying her bag, but this time, she moved more quickly and carefully than before. He felt a mixture of fear and curiosity and decided to follow her at a safe distance. He stayed hidden behind the trees and bushes, moving slowly so she could not see him. Alina seemed aware of her surroundings, constantly checking behind her, as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. She reached the small clearing in the woods and paused, looking around nervously. Mark could see the faint outline of another person waiting there. The man stepped forward as Alina approached. They exchanged a few quick words, and Alina handed over something from her bag. Mark could not hear what they were saying, but the urgency in their gestures was unmistakable. Alina's hands trembled slightly, and the man nodded firmly, taking what she had given him. Then, just as quickly, she turned and walked away, glancing over her shoulder several times as she did. Mark's mind raced. He had never imagined that something so serious could be happening so close to his home. The calm neighborhood he had always known seemed suddenly filled with hidden dangers and unknown stories. Mark returned home that night with a mixture of emotions. He felt curious, concerned, and strangely connected to Alina. He could not sleep, thinking about the secret life she must be living, the fear she carried, and the courage it must take to move through the world so carefully. He realized that he had stumbled upon a life far different from his own, one full of hidden struggles and quiet bravery. Mark decided that he would not ignore what he had seen. He needed to understand more, not just out of curiosity, but because he felt that Alina might need help someday, and he wanted to be ready. Over the next few days, Mark's observations became more focused. He noticed the subtle ways Alina protected herself. She avoided walking near the street, using the trees and bushes for cover. She always carried the same small bag, carefully securing its contents, and moved with deliberate caution. Sometimes she would stop suddenly, as though listening for someone, and crouch behind a bush or tree to remain hidden. Mark began to understand that her life was filled with constant alertness and careful planning. Each step she took was measured, every movement deliberate. It was a level of awareness he had never seen in anyone before. One afternoon, Mark decided to try a different approach. He wanted to understand Alina better, but without frightening her. He prepared a small basket of freshly baked bread and fruit, hoping it could be a gentle way to start a conversation. He walked over to her garden, keeping his steps calm and careful. "Hello, Alina," he said softly, holding out the basket. She looked up, surprised, her eyes wide with caution. For a moment she did not respond, as if unsure whether to trust him. Then slowly she nodded and took the basket. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried a note of relief. That small gesture marked the beginning of a cautious connection between them. Mark continued to leave small items at her gate, sometimes fruit, sometimes bread, sometimes a simple note wishing her a good day. Alina accepted these gestures with quiet gratitude, slowly allowing him to become a part of her world. Though she still moved carefully and kept her secrets close, Mark could see small signs of trust developing. Her glances no longer held the same fear they had before, and she began to acknowledge his presence with a small smile from time to time. One evening, as Mark watched from his porch, he noticed Alina moving differently. She was still cautious, but there was a hint of determination in her steps. She carried her bag as usual, but she no longer glanced behind her as frequently. Something had changed. Mark wondered if she had made a plan or if she had decided to take a small step toward freedom. The tension in her movements was still there, but it was mixed with a quiet confidence he had not seen before. He felt a surge of admiration for her bravery. Living like that, constantly aware of potential danger, required more courage than he could imagine. Mark also began to reflect on the hidden struggles people carry in their lives. Alina was not just a quiet neighbor. She was a person with a past, a life that required careful navigation and constant vigilance. He realized that many people might live hidden lives, facing challenges and fears that no one else could see. Alina's story, though still largely unknown to him, became a reminder that courage often goes unnoticed, and that ordinary people can display extraordinary strength when faced with difficult circumstances. As days turned into weeks, Mark's curiosity about Alina grew, but so did his respect for her privacy. He never pushed her for answers, never asked intrusive questions. Instead, he observed, helped in small ways, and offered silent support. He understood that trust could not be forced, it had to be earned. And Alina, though cautious, was slowly allowing him to be a small part of her life. The bond between them remained unspoken, built on quiet gestures, shared spaces, and the silent understanding that each was aware of the other's presence and care. Then came the evening that changed everything. Mark was on his porch when he noticed Alina leaving her house, bag in hand, moving faster than usual. His heart raced as he decided to follow her once again, more closely than before. She moved through the trees behind her house with remarkable speed and focus. This time, the man she met in the clearing was not alone. Another figure emerged from the shadows, and Alina seemed tense, almost frightened. Mark crouched behind a large tree, watching the exchange unfold. They spoke in urgent whispers, and Alina handed over her bag's contents again. The scene was tense, filled with unspoken danger, and Mark realized that whatever Alina was involved in was far more serious than he had imagined. Mark's mind was flooded with questions. Why was Alina so careful? Who were these people she was meeting? And why did she carry a bag that seemed so important? His imagination ran wild with possibilities, but one thing became clear. Alina was not in an ordinary situation. She was navigating something dangerous, something that required her to remain hidden and alert at all times. Mark felt a mixture of fear, concern, and determination. He knew he could not ignore her situation any longer. He needed to understand the truth, and he needed to be prepared to help if necessary. That night, Mark lay awake, thinking about Alina and her secret life. He realized that ordinary neighborhoods often held extraordinary stories, and that courage could take many forms. Alina's careful movements, quiet strength, and unwavering alertness were a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure challenges, even when faced with fear and uncertainty. Mark understood that the world was full of hidden struggles, and that sometimes being a good neighbor meant simply being present, ready to support without judgment. Mark's perspective on his quiet neighborhood had changed. What had once seemed peaceful and predictable now felt alive with hidden stories, untold struggles, and quiet bravery. He knew that Alina's life was complicated, but he also knew that she was strong enough to face it. And he promised himself that, whatever the future held, he would stand ready to help, silently supporting her as she navigated the challenges before her. The bond between them, though still fragile and unspoken, had begun to grow, built on trust, respect, and quiet understanding. Days passed, and Mark's curiosity about Alina had grown into a quiet concern. He had watched her from a distance for weeks now, noticed her careful movements, her nervous glances, and the small bag she always carried. He had also seen her meet mysterious figures in the woods behind her house. It was clear to him that Alina's life was far from ordinary. She was cautious, brave, and clearly dealing with something serious, something she could not share openly. The thought of her moving through the world with so much fear made Mark both anxious and determined. He felt he had to do something, even if it was just offering support in small ways. One bright morning, Mark noticed Alina in her garden, tending her flowers as usual. But today, she seemed even more tense. Her hands shook slightly as she pruned the leaves, and her eyes kept darting toward the street and the back gate. Mark felt a pang of concern. He could no longer ignore the feeling that Alina might need help, not just friendly gestures or a loaf of bread, but real understanding and support. He decided that it was time to approach her carefully, not as a neighbor spying from afar, but as someone willing to listen and help. Mark stepped into her garden, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Hi, Alina," he said softly. She looked up quickly, startled, her eyes wide with caution. For a moment, Mark thought she might run or retreat into her house. But then, slowly, she relaxed slightly, though her hands still clutched the small garden shears tightly. "Hi," she replied quietly, her voice trembling a little. Mark smiled gently, holding out his hands in a non-threatening way. "I just wanted to check if you're okay. You seem worried." Alina looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if deciding whether to trust him. She seemed to hesitate, caught between fear and relief. Finally, she sighed and set the garden shears down. I guess I can't hide it anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark felt his heart skip a beat. He had hoped for a chance to help her, and now it seemed she was willing to speak. He nodded encouragingly, staying calm. "It's okay, Alina. You can tell me. I won't judge and I won't tell anyone. I just want to help." Alina took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she adjusted the strap of her bag. "I'm running from the army," she confessed finally, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and relief. Mark blinked in surprise, taken aback by the gravity of her words. She explained that she had been drafted unexpectedly, but she could not serve due to personal reasons. She feared being forced into something she was not ready for, something she could not handle. "I know it sounds strange," she added quickly, "but I had no choice. I had to leave to find a safe place. That's why I moved here to this neighborhood. It seemed quiet, unnoticed, safe." Mark listened in stunned silence. He had never imagined that his quiet neighbor was carrying such a heavy burden. The fear in her eyes, the cautious way she moved, and the secret meetings in the woods, all of it now made sense. He realized that Alina's life had become a careful balance between hiding and surviving. "You're very brave, Alina," he said softly, trying to offer some comfort. "I can't imagine how hard this must be, but you don't have to face it alone. I'm here if you need me." Alina looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. She had spent weeks living in fear, always alert, always cautious, and now she was opening up to a stranger. It was not easy for her, but Mark's calm presence seemed to offer a small sense of safety. She began to explain more about her situation. The army had strict rules, and refusing service could bring serious consequences. She had no family nearby to help her, and her friends did not know about her draft. Moving to this neighborhood had been a desperate attempt to find safety while she figured out her next steps. Mark felt a deep empathy for Alina. He realized that courage did not always look like heroism on a battlefield. Sometimes it looked like living in fear, making careful decisions, and surviving each day. Alina had been doing exactly that quietly, without complaint. She had been hiding, protecting herself, and trying to navigate a dangerous situation. Mark felt honored that she trusted him enough to share her story, even partially. It was a reminder that ordinary people could face extraordinary challenges with resilience and quiet strength. Over the next few days, Mark began to help Alina in small but meaningful ways. He would check in on her without being intrusive, leave supplies or food, and offer advice when appropriate. He also helped her think through her daily routines, suggesting safe ways to move through the neighborhood and avoid attention. Alina, cautious at first, slowly began to rely on his guidance. She trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in weeks. Mark could see that each small act of support gave her a little more confidence, a little more courage to face the challenges ahead. One afternoon, while they were sitting in the garden, Alina shared more about her fears. "Every time I leave the house, I feel like I'm being watched," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I have to plan every step, every movement. I can't let anyone see me carelessly because that could be dangerous." Mark nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know it's hard," he said gently, "but you're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." Mark's presence became a quiet anchor in Alina's life. She still moved cautiously, but knowing that someone cared, someone understood, made a difference. She began to feel less isolated, less afraid. The small gestures, Mark's thoughtful check-ins, the supplies he left, and even the calm way he listened, gave her a sense of security she had not experienced in weeks. It was not a complete solution to her problems, but it was a start, a glimmer of hope in a world that had seemed overwhelmingly threatening. One evening, Alina revealed something that shocked Mark. She had been forced to leave behind most of her personal belongings, fearing that carrying too much would attract attention. The small bag she carried contained only essentials, documents, a few personal items, and a small notebook where she recorded her thoughts and plans. She showed him the notebook, hesitating at first, but then trusting him enough to let him see. The pages were filled with careful notes, plans, and reminders, everything she needed to survive while staying hidden. Mark could see the determination in her handwriting, the careful strategy she had devised to protect herself. As the days went on, Mark and Alina began to develop a quiet partnership. He offered guidance and support, while she shared information and insights about her situation. They discussed safe routes through the neighborhood, ways to avoid unwanted attention, and strategies for maintaining her secrecy. Mark admired her intelligence and resilience. Despite the fear she carried, she was methodical, careful, and strategic. Every step she took was calculated, every decision weighed against potential risk. She was living a life of constant alertness, yet she managed it with remarkable composure. Through their conversations, Mark began to understand the depth of Alina's courage. It was not the kind of courage that earned recognition or praise. It was quiet, patient, and enduring. It was the courage to face each day, to navigate fear, and to protect oneself in a world that could be unforgiving. He realized that bravery often came in forms that were invisible to the world. Alina's courage was not loud or dramatic, but it was powerful, inspiring, and deeply human. Mark also reflected on his own life and how much he had taken for granted. He had lived in comfort, without constant fear or danger, and now he saw someone living a life of hidden struggle with remarkable resilience. Alina's story reminded him that courage was not always about extraordinary acts. Sometimes it was about surviving, adapting, and persevering in the face of adversity. It was about facing fear with quiet determination and finding ways to keep going, even when the path seemed impossible. As part 3 draws to a close, Mark knew that Alina's story was far from over. She had shared her secret, revealing the truth behind her cautious movements and hidden life. But the challenges were still ahead, and the journey would not be easy. What had begun as curiosity had transformed into a deep empathy and commitment. Mark understood that being a neighbor, being a friend, sometimes meant offering support in the quietest, simplest ways, through listening, understanding, and helping without judgment. And for Alina, knowing that someone truly cared gave her a small, yet powerful sense of hope. After Alina had finally revealed her secret, Mark felt both relieved and concerned. He now understood why she had been so cautious, why her every movement had been calculated, and why she had carried that small bag with such care. But relief was quickly replaced by a new worry. The situation was far from over. Alina's fear was real, and danger could appear at any moment. Even in a quiet neighborhood like theirs, she could not let her guard down. Mark knew that helping her now required more than just quiet gestures. It meant planning, thinking ahead, and being ready for unexpected challenges. In the following days, Mark noticed that Alina became even more careful than before. She would check the streets multiple times before leaving her house, move through the trees slowly, and make sure no one was watching her from a distance. The tension in her movements was noticeable, and Mark could see how much mental energy it cost her to stay alert all the time. He wanted to help, but he also knew that he had to respect her boundaries. Alina had survived this long because she had been careful, and any sudden mistake could put her in danger. One evening, Mark saw something that made his heart race. While Alina was leaving her house with her usual bag, he noticed a black vehicle slowly passing through the neighborhood. Its windows were tinted, and the driver seemed to be watching the houses carefully. Mark crouched behind the bushes, trying to remain unseen, and realized that the danger was closer than he had imagined. Alina had not yet noticed the vehicle, but the sight filled him with fear. It was clear that the people she was hiding from might be searching for her, and every step she took could bring her closer to discovery. Mark made a split-second decision. He had to warn her. Quietly, he stepped out of the shadows and called her name softly. Alina froze, her eyes wide with alarm, and then recognition flashed across her face. She immediately understood the situation. "They're here," she whispered, clutching her bag tightly. "We have to move carefully." Mark nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. Together, they retreated into the garden, crouching behind thick bushes and trees to remain hidden from the vehicle. The tension was unbearable, each second stretching endlessly as they waited for the vehicle to pass. After what felt like an eternity, the car finally drove away. Alina exhaled deeply, her shoulders trembling with relief. "It's getting closer," she said quietly. "They must be following leads, checking neighborhoods. I don't have much time." Mark felt a surge of determination. He realized that helping Alina now was more urgent than ever. He could not let fear paralyze him. He had to act. Together, they began to discuss a careful plan. Mark suggested routes she could take to avoid the main streets, places to hide temporarily, and times of day when movement would be safest. Alina listened intently, absorbing every suggestion. Over the next few days, the situation became even more intense. Mark helped Alina prepare supplies, food, water, basic necessities, so that she could move quickly if needed. He also researched local safe spaces, quiet alleys, and parks where she could remain unseen. Every decision required careful thought. Even small mistakes could alert the authorities or those searching for her. Mark realized that the calm life of their neighborhood had become a complex puzzle, with each step requiring strategy and awareness. He admired Alina's resilience, but he also felt the heavy burden she carried daily. One afternoon, as they were walking through a narrow path behind the houses, Alina suddenly stopped. She held up her hand, signaling Mark to stay silent. From a distance, they noticed a man in a dark uniform patrolling the streets. He seemed to be looking for someone, walking slowly and checking each house. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. They crouched behind a tree, barely breathing, and waited for him to move past. Alina's hands shook as she clutched her bag, and Mark silently reassured her. They had avoided detection this time, but the threat was very real. Every day, every hour could bring new danger. That evening, Alina confided in Mark about the mental strain she had been experiencing. "It's exhausting," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Every day I wake up knowing I have to hide. Every step, every movement, it feels like I'm being watched. Sometimes I feel like I can't do it anymore." Mark listened, his heart aching for her. He knew she had been carrying this burden alone for weeks, and now, finally, she had someone who understood. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. "We'll face this together. You've been strong for so long, and now it's okay to rely on someone else." Despite the constant tension, Mark and Alina worked together to make small improvements in her daily routine. They mapped out safer routes for her to move through the neighborhood, identified quiet spaces where she could rest, and discussed signals they could use to warn each other of approaching danger. These strategies helped Alina regain some sense of control over her situation. Even though the threat remained, having a plan and someone to rely on gave her courage she hadn't felt in weeks. It was a small victory in an otherwise overwhelming situation, but it mattered greatly. One night, a sudden noise outside their houses startled them. Mark and Alina froze, listening intently. It was the sound of footsteps on gravel, moving slowly but deliberately. They peeked through the bushes and saw a figure approaching, a uniformed officer clearly checking the neighborhood. Mark's mind raced. They had to stay hidden. Alina's breathing grew shallow, and she tightened her grip on her bag. Together, they crouched behind the garden fence, moving as quietly as possible. The officer passed by without noticing them, but the encounter left them both shaken. It was a harsh reminder that danger could appear at any moment, and even careful planning could not eliminate all risks. The following morning, Alina expressed her frustration and fear. "I feel trapped," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I can't go anywhere, I can't trust anyone, and I can't live normally. Every day feels like a test I didn't ask for." Mark reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know it's hard," he said, "but you've survived this long. You're incredibly strong, and now you have me to help you. We'll figure this out together, one step at a time." Alina nodded, tears in her eyes. She felt a mix of relief and gratitude, knowing that she was no longer facing her fears alone. As the days went on, Mark and Alina continued to refine their strategies. They practiced moving quietly, learned to read signs of approaching danger, and identified safe points where she could stay temporarily if needed. Every small step was crucial. Alina's courage and determination were remarkable, but Mark also realized that her mental and physical strength could only go so far. That was why his support mattered. Together, they were stronger than they could be alone. One afternoon, a new challenge arose. Alina received information that someone had spotted her in the area and reported it. The risk of discovery was now higher than ever. She felt panic rising, and Mark quickly stepped in to calm her. They made a detailed plan to relocate her temporarily, using a combination of safe routes and hidden spaces. Every decision was critical. The stakes were high, but Alina's determination, combined with Mark's careful guidance, gave them a fighting chance. They moved cautiously through the streets, their senses alert, avoiding any sign of attention. Throughout this ordeal, Mark observed something remarkable. Despite the constant threat, Alina did not give up. Her fear was present, yes, but it was accompanied by courage, quick thinking, and resourcefulness. She adapted to every situation, learned from each close encounter, and used every opportunity to make her movements safer. Mark felt inspired by her resilience. He realized that bravery often came in quiet, persistent ways, not just dramatic actions. Alina's courage was a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure, survive, and protect oneself even in the face of overwhelming danger. By the end of Part 4, Alina had managed to avoid detection for several days, thanks to careful planning, vigilance, and Mark's support. Yet, the tension remained high. Every sound, every unexpected movement reminded them that the threat was real. Their bond had grown stronger, built on trust, understanding, and shared challenges. Mark had learned the depth of Alina's courage, and she had learned that she did not have to face her fears alone. Together, they had turned an ordinary neighborhood into a carefully navigated space of safety, strategy, and resilience. Mark also reflected on the lessons he had learned through this experience. Life could change suddenly, thrusting people into situations they never imagined. Courage was not always visible or celebrated. It often manifested in quiet endurance, careful planning, and determination to survive against the odds. Alina's story had opened his eyes to the hidden struggles people faced, and he felt grateful that he could play even a small role in helping her navigate this difficult chapter. After days of careful planning and tense moments, Alina finally began to see a path forward. The constant fear that had haunted her for weeks was still there, but for the first time, she felt a small sense of hope. Mark had been by her side through every step of the ordeal, offering guidance, support, and quiet reassurance. His presence had become a source of strength she had not realized she needed. Together, they had navigated the dangers lurking in their otherwise calm neighborhood, finding safe paths, avoiding detection, and making every movement count. One morning, after a particularly tense night in which they had hidden from a suspicious vehicle, Alina and Mark sat quietly in the garden. The sun was rising, casting soft light over the neighborhood, and for a moment, it felt almost peaceful. Alina looked at Mark with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "I don't know how I could have done this without you," she admitted softly. Mark smiled gently. "You've been incredibly strong all along," he said. "I just helped a little. You've survived this because of your courage and determination." Alina nodded, realizing that the quiet support and trust between them had been as important as any careful plan or strategy. In the days that followed, they began to explore more long-term solutions. Alina could not live in constant fear forever, and they both knew that the temporary safety of the neighborhood was not enough. Mark helped her research legal ways to delay her service, ways to explain her circumstances, and potential organizations that could provide protection and guidance. Every piece of information they gathered became part of a careful plan. Alina worked diligently, her focus sharpened by the months of cautious living, and Mark provided support and advice whenever she needed it. Together, they built a strategy that balanced safety, legality, and practicality. Despite the progress, moments of fear and uncertainty still arose. One afternoon, Alina received news that the army had increased checks in nearby areas. The thought of being discovered sent waves of anxiety through her. Mark could see the fear returning in her eyes, and he moved closer, speaking calmly. "We've handled dangerous situations before," he reminded her gently. "We can handle this too. We'll stick to the plan, stay careful, and you'll be safe." Alina took a deep breath, feeling her tension ease slightly. She realized that having someone who truly understood her situation made the difference between paralyzing fear and controlled action. Mark also helped Alina regain some normalcy in her daily life. They worked on small routines that allowed her to feel safe while still enjoying simple pleasures. They planted flowers together in the garden, tended vegetables, and even read books in the afternoons. These small moments were more than distractions. They were acts of reclaiming life from fear. Alina began to laugh quietly again, smile more often, and move with a sense of purpose beyond just survival. Each small step reminded her that life could still hold peace, even after weeks of stress and uncertainty. As time went on, they received help from a local organization that specialized in legal protection for those avoiding forced military service. The process was slow, requiring paperwork, interviews, and verification, but it offered Alina a sense of hope that she had not felt in weeks. Mark assisted her through every step, helping her understand forms, preparing her for meetings, and offering emotional support. Alina's courage, combined with his steady presence, made the challenges manageable. She felt less isolated, less afraid, and more in control of her destiny. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings and paperwork, Alina and Mark sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. The neighborhood was calm, the streets empty, and for the first time the threat that had dominated Alina's life seemed distant. She looked at Mark with deep gratitude. "I feel like I can finally breathe," she said softly. Mark nodded. "You've earned this moment," he said. "You've been strong, careful, and brave. It's finally time to let yourself feel safe." For the first time in weeks, Alina felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She realized that courage was not only about surviving danger, it was also about allowing oneself to live fully, even after fear. Over the next few weeks, Alina's life began to stabilize. The legal protection was confirmed temporarily, giving her the freedom to move without constant fear of detection. She began to take small walks in the neighborhood, gradually reintroducing herself to normal life. Mark continued to offer quiet support, though his role shifted from guiding her through danger to helping her adjust to a life where fear no longer ruled every decision. They continued to plant flowers in the garden, read books, and share quiet conversations about life, dreams, and hopes for the future. Through this journey, Mark reflected on the lessons he had learned. He realized that bravery often comes in forms that are quiet and unnoticed. Alina's courage had been remarkable, not just in avoiding danger, but in living carefully, thinking strategically, and never giving up even when fear was constant. Her strength had inspired him to see the depth of resilience in ordinary people. He also understood the importance of trust, empathy, and small acts of kindness. By being present, offering support, and listening without judgment, he had helped someone carry a burden that had seemed unbearable alone. Alina, for her part, learned to trust again, not just Mark, but the idea that there could be safety, kindness, and understanding in the world. She realized that she did not have to face challenges alone, and that seeking help did not mean weakness. Her journey had been filled with fear, tension, and constant vigilance, but it had also shown her the value of connection, trust, and hope. She discovered that even in the darkest times, human kindness and empathy could make a profound difference. As the weeks turned into months, Alina slowly reintegrated into everyday life. She returned to simple routines she had avoided for fear of detection, like visiting the local market, walking in the park, and spending more time in her garden. Mark continued to support her, though now their interactions were more relaxed, filled with laughter, shared stories, and quiet companionship. The tension that had dominated their lives gradually faded, replaced by a sense of stability, hope, and mutual respect. One evening, Alina turned to Mark as they watered the flowers together. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You've done more for me than I could ever imagine." Mark smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You've been brave, careful, and determined. I just helped you along the way. The strength was always yours." Alina nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and relief. She knew that her journey had been difficult, but having someone who cared and believed in her made all the difference. Mark also reflected on the journey they had shared. He realized that life often presents unexpected challenges, and sometimes the greatest courage is found in ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Alina's story had shown him that strength is not always loud or visible. It can be quiet, patient, and enduring. He felt grateful to have played a role in her journey, and he knew that the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. He understood that kindness, empathy, and trust could change lives, even in small, seemingly ordinary ways. By the time the legal protection was fully confirmed, Alina was able to move freely without fear. She no longer had to hide or plan every movement meticulously. Life, though still filled with normal challenges, felt lighter, safer, and more hopeful. The bond between Mark and Alina had grown stronger, built on trust, shared experiences, and the quiet understanding of what it meant to face fear and overcome it. They had navigated danger together, and now they could enjoy the peace that had been missing for so long. In the final days of their journey together, Alina reflected on everything she had experienced. She had faced fear, navigated danger, and survived through careful planning, courage, and resilience. But she had also discovered the power of trust, support, and human connection. Mark had been there through it all, offering guidance, reassurance, and friendship. She realized that bravery was not just about facing danger. It was also about allowing oneself to live fully, trust others, and accept help when it was needed. As the sun set over their quiet neighborhood, Alina and Mark sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The world felt calm, safe, and full of possibilities. The tension and fear that had once dominated their lives had faded, replaced by hope, courage, and a sense of accomplishment. Alina knew that the journey had changed her forever, teaching her lessons about resilience, trust, and the value of human connection. Mark, too, felt a deep sense of fulfillment, having witnessed and supported someone's extraordinary courage. Their story ended not with dramatic fanfare, but with quiet reflection, relief, and the knowledge that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they faced challenges with courage and had support from those who cared. Alina's life was no longer defined by fear, but by strength, hope, and the quiet determination to move forward. Mark had learned that being a good neighbor and a compassionate human being could truly make a difference in someone's life. Together they had survived fear, navigated danger, and emerged stronger on the other side. And so, in a small, ordinary neighborhood, a quiet bond had grown into a story of courage, resilience, and human kindness. Alina's journey from fear to freedom became a testament to the quiet strength within people and the impact of empathy, support, and trust. Life returned to a peaceful rhythm, but the lessons, experiences, and connection they had shared would remain with them forever, shaping the way they faced the future, one careful, courageous step at a time.